Welcome, and thank you for joining the Market Surveillance Committee meeting. Before we begin, please ensure you have opened the WebEx participant and chat panels by using the associated icons located at the bottom of your screen. Note that all audio connections are muted at this time, but you can press #2 on your telephone keypad to place yourself into the question queue. If you require technical assistance, please send the chat to the event producer. With that, I'll turn the conference over to Dr. Benjamin Hobbs, Chair of the Market Surveillance Committee.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon if you're on the East Coast listening to this. I'm Ben Hobbs, and I'm here with Jim Bushnell and Scott Harvey of the MSC meeting, of the California ISO, and we have two major items on the agenda today, import bidding and market parameters in the morning, and in the afternoon, RA enhancements. But first, as always, we'll start with an opportunity for public comment, and I'll ask that if it's concerning an issue that's on the agenda later, if it's possible for you to wait till that time, that for that particular item, that'd be best. So let's see. At this point, we'll take comments. Okay, Callie.
This is Callie Wells with WPTF. So I just wanted to take this opportunity and tee up a topic for discussion that I'm sure it could take up an entire MSC meeting, but we would like it to see it on agenda in the next MSC meeting or two, and that's the impact the Track 1A and Track 1B CRR market changes have had on the performance of the market. We know the ISO, through their NPPF presentations always put out some great analysis, but we've seen some other analysis that have indicated there's a couple issues that we would like to further discuss, and that's one of them is being the impact loop flows is having on the CR shortfall allocation. We think this is actually a significant driver, and there's minimal transparency on the loop flows in the market. So it's challenging for CR holders to really manage that additional risk that's coming with the new CR shortfall allocation. And the second one is the impact that restricting the biddable pairs has had on the price accuracy. We know that was one of the goals of this initiative.
The impact of restricting pairs upon what again?
Pricing accuracy.
Okay, price.
Yeah, that was one of the goals of the initiative, and kind of what we've seen in some cases is that it looks like that by restricting that biddable pairs, we're actually pricing accuracy deteriorate rather than improve in some cases. And we think that that might have something to do with the fact that there's an inability to bid in for counterflows. We'd like to further explore the role that by removing that direct counterflow in the market has had on pricing accuracy.
Good timing because we're just starting to talk about the agenda for the next meeting, which will be at the end of January. So thank you for that suggestion, Callie. Anybody else within the room? If not, then can ask the operator if you wouldn't mind checking if there's anybody on the phones who would like to make a comment at this time.
We do have one question in the queue.
Okay, thank you. Please go ahead.
Yes, this is Peter Griffiths with PG&E.
Hi, Peter.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that you guys don't forget us who are calling in and on the phone. Oftentimes the discussion gets going pretty well, and it is difficult to participate remotely if you don't go to the phone. So please don't forget to go to the phones.
Okay. Thank you for the reminder. And I don't know if there are any, so if you're on the phone, you can raise a hand, and the operator will see it and can let Shami know about it. So thank you. I know that we sometimes get a lot of momentum here in the discussion. So thanks, Peter, and I'm very glad that you're participating remotely. Always glad to have you up here, but I'm not ignoring you on the phone in order to incent you to come up, though. I understand it's a bit of a drive. Okay. Anybody else on the phone, operator?
There are no further questions.
Okay. All right. At this point, we'll then go on the next item on the agenda. We have two sets of minutes, one from the in-person meeting here in Folsom and one from the phone meeting where we adopted the opinion on system market power proceedings. So let me first see if there's a motion to adopt. Okay.
I move
Dr.
to
Harvey.
both.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I second.
Okay. Is there any discussion, corrections, anything else in either?
No.
Hearing none, I'll go ahead and take the votes. Scott?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
And I vote yes, and so the minutes have been approved unanimously, and we are now ready to hear from Brittany and Danielle about import bidding and market parameters. And this will take up, I'm sure, the full morning. There's a lot to this.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, MSB. We are today going to be talking about FERC Order 831, import bidding and market parameters. First, we'll dive into the introduction around how this initiative got started and then our proposal. So our introduction in 2016, FERC raised the energy offer cap for all ISOs and RTOs from 1,000 to 2,000. This was also required suppliers that are submitting energy bids greater than 1,000 to be based on expected or actual short-run marginal costs. The order also required ISOs and RTOs to verify costs above $1,000 before the market in order for those bids to be able to set energy prices. It also then capped any energy bids at $2,000, then also required the ISO and RTOs to provide make-whole payments for resources bids that are greater than 1,000, and it did not require the same verification rules for imports and virtual bids of $1,000 megawatt hour. Hold on for 1 sec. So what we did, and this was all through the CCW initiative as well as our compliance for 831, is we did not propose to verify non-resource specific import bids and propose to allow those importers and suppliers to submit bids up to $2,000. And then also, our energy cap is tied to how we set our market constraint relaxation penalty prices. So we then had to also raise those from $1,000 to the new cap of $2,000. And then the reason we're coming back today is we had stakeholders raise some concerns about those proposals, and so we have started an initiative to re-examine. And Michelle, you have a question?
Yeah, I have two questions. Michelle Keita from CPC. So can you go back to the previous slide? Sure. So here you're saying that FERC did not require the same verification rules for imports or virtual bids above $1,000. That's not, and can you just explain why? So in this case, they are treating imports different than internal resources, right?
Correct.
Based on some recognition that they have different attributes, right?
I don't know that specifically off the top of my head why FERC thinks that they're different, but that's what they raised.
I thought you later say that FERC thought that it would be hard because they're nonspecific, so it would be hard to verify the cost.
I didn't say FERC did that. It was part of our
Yeah, I think that was, as I recall, I think that was for imports.
Okay, so it might make sense if the resources have different attributes. Now, I just want to also clarify, non-resource specific resources, if they bid in the day ahead and aren't picked up, they don't have a real-time obligation, right?
I don't think so, no.
Right.
No.
You're talking about RA resources?
Actually, I'm talking about all resources, so if you go to your BPM, I just want to clarify what we're talking about here. So it looks like non-specific resources do not have bid insertion. I can direct you to the BPM. Non-dynamic, non-resource specific system resources, that is non-specific unit-specific imports.
Right. Bid insertion is just for RA resources.
Okay. Okay. So, if they're released in the day ahead, be they RA or not RA, they have no further real-time obligation.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Okay, then my second question is, I just want to...
Just be clear, non-RA resources have no obligation to bid anything.
Yeah, okay. Okay, fine. Okay, so then I just want to talk about resource-specific bids. So what you're saying here, I just want to clarify that what we're talking about here are not imports that are resource-specific. So imports that are resource-specific, that is, they're dynamically scheduled, they're pseudo-tied in, you will verify their cost similar to import bids, or similar to internal resources. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, and that's true for both dynamic let's see, non-dynamic resource-specific system resources and non-dynamic, sorry. You just have so many terms.
It's true for all resource-specific system resources, whether or not they're dynamic or not dynamic.
Yep, and whether they're internal or not, right? As long as they're resource-specific, we're going to verify the cost.
There's no such thing as an internal system resource. System resource refers to something outside of our BA.
Really? Because if I look at 7.1.1, summary of bidding requirements for resources providing RA capacity, it says dynamic resources, Okay. Well, for example, Sutter is located in California, but it's dynamically scheduled or pseudo-tied in, right? It's kind of outside of the, I just am saying that we might consider those an import even though they're Sutter and they're sort of internal. I'm just clarifying.
Okay, yeah, it's resource specific. So if we have a cost methodology that we can estimate their cost for them, the CAISO, that's resource specific.
Okay.
And they will have their cost verified.
Okay. Let me just go a little bit further. So let's say they're resource specific and use limited hydro. Will you still do that? Just want to clarify.
If we have them.
I'm not following your question.
Okay.
So like, are you talking about like the hydro debt we just came up with?
Right.
So
let's say, so right now we have what Hoover and Palo Verde are external to us, but they're resource specific, so you can estimate their costs, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so for this purposes of this cost verification between 1,000 and 2,000, you'll do cost verification for Palo Verde and Hoover, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about,
I know,
we're talking about here are plain old generic imports, non-resource specific.
I understand, and let me just tell you why I'm just perseverating on this. So some parties in this proceeding, for example, PowerX, have argued that we should, for RA purposes, we should only use resource-specific resources, but PowerX is also arguing against this particular initiative. So I'm just a little confused about that, right? So I'm just trying to clarify that what we're talking about here are non-specific resource imports, right?
That's correct. Yeah. Okay. And if PowerX is on the phone and would like to talk to their argument that you're saying, we should see if they're available.
While we're testing that, I just had a nomenclature question. I think the term resource-specific system resource was used, and that seems a bit like an oxymoron to me, but so it just means a resource-specific out of CAISO system. That's basically what it means.
Yes. Yeah, so I think I'm kind of confused about where we're going with all this, but in any case, what we're talking about here are what we call non-resource specific system resources, which are just bids to import energy at the interties. I don't think we should overcomplicate this.
Okay. We have somebody on the phone. So.
Will, can you go ahead and put that question through?
Will do.
Hi, good morning. It's Jeff Spires with PowerX. I thought I would just try to respond a bit. I think I'm also perhaps somewhat uncertain of exactly what the question was, but I'll try my best. I think in the context of resource adequacy and seeking to eliminate the challenges associated with paper capacity or speculative supply, which I think we're going to be discussing later today, we are supportive of identifying the specific resource or the specific portfolio of resources that are being used to supply that import resource adequacy. We think that that is, a straightforward step to try to eliminate some of the challenges that we've been faced with to date with non-resource specific RA. And so I think in that context, that has been our opinion, is that resource-specific and identifying which resources are being nominated in advance to be made available to the CAISO under the RA program is a straightforward and simple approach to address some of those challenges with paper capacity. But I think in the context of this discussion with the import verification, regardless of that, the external resources have other opportunities in other markets and particular to hydro in other time frames with their storage capabilities. And so I think when you're looking at energy limited resources that are external to the CAISO market, the fact remains that verifying costs in the context of opportunity costs is extremely challenging, and that's something, of course, we've discussed with the HydroDB and some of the other areas. So I'm not sure that I'm seeing the precise link between the external resource-specific proposal for resource adequacy and this import verification challenge, because I think that regardless, even if you do have a resource-specific resource that you're pointing to, it still faces other opportunities that are difficult to verify.
And this is precisely my point. So here he's arguing that the RA capacity should be resource specific, but he's also arguing, oh, it's going to be too hard to verify the cost. So that's one of my points. And secondly, I just want to point out that in our verification program, plenty of people are now saying that resources that I believe are non-resource specific, literally they come in as MLIN, right? You guys know what the nomenclature for resource IDs are. It's either a specific resource or it has a tie on it, right? So they're saying that these resources that are coming in as ties are resource specific. So this is why I'm spending so much time on this, because they are attesting that these are resource specific resources. So
I think you're mixing issues.
I don't think so.
Well, I think what they're saying is, yes, they are delivering the import energy from a specific generator. That may well be the case, but that doesn't mean that we're modeling them in our market like that. In our market, they're just submitting an import bid. You know, there is some energy coming from somewhere. There's ultimately a generator generating energy for every import. So it is coming from a resource, but that doesn't mean that we're modeling that resource in our market. We're just modeling a, plain vanilla import.
Okay, so I'm sorry to spend so much time on this, but let's say something from a balancing area is resource specific. They're saying, I'm coming from this balancing authority and I'm resource specific. But when they come to CAISO, they're going to register as MLIN, and it's going to look like a non-resource specific resource consistent with your BPM. But they're going to say it's resource specific. So I just am saying that there's a lot of gaming going on here from my perspective, because I think that things that have a non-resource specific ID consistent with you, they're saying that they're resource specific. So they're both saying, and now they're also saying it's going to be too hard to verify us, even if we're resource specific. So I will put this in my comments, but I am concerned about this, and so this is why the definitions are so absolutely critical to me.
So one way to, I think, paraphrase what you're saying is there's a concern that one might use a different definition of resource specificity for the RA compliance channel versus this import cost compliance channel, and you're asking for consistency in the application of the definition of resource specificity.
Right. So if BPA is saying, or PowerX is saying, for RE purposes, we're going to be resource specific, well, then I just want to clarify that means that they will justify their cost above $1,000 to $2,000 if they bid in the market. And I just don't feel like I'm getting that clarity.
This is Anna McKenna. I just wanted to comment that I appreciate the confusion that's often created by use of terminology, probably because I spend most of my days looking at terms. But the terms we're using in this particular proceeding are closely tied to the definitions of our tariff, and, I appreciate that there may be differences in terms of how people perceive those when they're submitting their tags and the information at the intertie. But I think if we could make sure that, the terminology is consistent with what's in our tariff already, will go a long way both from the RA perspective and the non-RA perspective, and I think we should provide an opportunity, or not opportunity, but we will in the next round perhaps make sure that the terminology is very precise and closely tied to those. I think that's a legitimate concern, but it isn't different than what exists today. I'm sure folks are aware of that. Everything we're looking at here is already defining our tariff groups of resources.
Yeah, and that's why I brought the BPM. I was trying to ask specific questions.
Yeah, and the BPM, I was on the call yesterday, or whenever that was too, I do have a concern because sometimes the BPM, in terms of the RA terminology, may not use exactly the same terms, and so we'll go back and make sure that we can connect those dots and give you a good table and assessment assessment of what resources are. Now, in terms of how people contract outside of our, system, we may not have that much, that's something that you guys deal with a lot more than we do. But the terminology should be all sort of copacetic between RA requirements in our tariff and these variation requirements. So we'll look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Again, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Just a couple of additional thoughts based on that conversation. I think I just want to reiterate that from PowerX perspective, we're supportive of the need here in the RA context to take decisive action to address this paper capacity problem, and so we understand a lot of what Michelle's getting at in terms of some of these challenges. But I think we are a seller of real physical capacity. We sell resource adequacy based on the surplus capabilities of the BC Hydro system, and so what we're really seeking to do is find a way to make sure that sellers like PowerX of real physical supply are able to provide that product to the CAISO and do so in a way that the CAISO is confident that that is truly real surplus capability and that it's based on physical supply and that the purchasers of RA products are getting what they think they're getting. And so we're looking forward to working with the CPUC, with the CAISO and others in terms of the RA requirements to make sure that we address the paper capacity problem, but we do so in a way where sellers of real physical capacity paid in the program. And I think with respect to the import bid verification, I think the only point we are making is that external resources have other opportunities and face opportunity costs that are challenging to verify. I don't think that we're suggesting that it is that there aren't solutions that could be looked at, and I think the CAISO has raised some alternatives in their presentation that they'll get to. So I do think that they're different topics, and I just wanted to clarify that our perspective is that it is challenging. We've got external resources, and they face different opportunities, different markets, different time frames, like I said before, and so it's something that needs to be carefully considered. But in general, we're supportive of moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jess. Michelle, is this pretty quick because we really should go on? Okay.
So I get that you're saying you're resource specific, but you're not coming in as a pseudo tie or a dynamic schedule. You are not coming in as a resource specific resource. I'm just saying. So I just want to clarify this point because I'd be happy at lunchtime to sit down with you if you like. I haven't had an opportunity to meet you before, Michelle. I apologize, but I think the struggle is that there's this fundamental misunderstanding that you could actually be a non-dynamic resource, not pseudo-tied in our system. Those are very different creatures, by the way, and I don't like to use pseudo-ties as part of the discussion because those are entirely different creatures from a legal perspective. But you could be a non-dynamic resource that's actually resource-specific, modeled in our market. You are afforded rights very similar to other internal generators with regards to your bid cost recovery and how we model your costs. And those are different creatures that exist today. Well, it hasn't been extensively used in our models, in our market, but they are under our tariff currently, right. So that's the difference. What I was trying to get at yesterday. And so now I'm asking a specific question. Would this resource that would be non-dynamic resource specific on your BPM page 78, would they be cost verified?
Yes.
Would we require them?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, verified. And even though it may be difficult, as Jeff has explained, generally speaking, under our proposal, we would have a model, because of the difficulties, that would still require that cost verification. They would not be exempt from it.
Okay. Thanks.
So before we go on, just a quick question. Since Michelle asked the question about why FERC gave the ISOs flexibility about how to treat imports, is PowerX's point in their comments that no other ISO is cost verifying imports? Is that indeed the case? And do we know something about whether some are considering doing that and decided not to, or?
I'm not certain, but I believe no other ISO is verifying.
Yeah, this is Anna. I'll clarify that question. No other ISO is actually filed separately. The Commission did not require under 831. No other ISO is filed separately to cost verify the interties, but there's a reason for that, and that has to do with the way bidding is at their interties. A lot of them have special arrangements from market to market, and those don't fall subject to these rules. They have separate arrangements. Also, a lot of other ISOs and RTOs do not allow for even economic bids at the interties, so they're only self-scheduled, if you wish, or price taker bids. So you have different dynamics going on that may not push for the same, or that may not create the same concerns we have in our market. So the lack of those filings first does not mean that the other ISOs and RTOs would not also pursue a similar approach to the ISOs here if they had a different market structure. And if the MSC has any comments on that, please. That's my observation based on what I've seen in the filings.
I have a quick question. Michelle Keita from the CPC. Do you know if other ISOs allow non-specific resources to count for resource adequacy, or do they require the resources to be specified?
That's like a question that would require maybe about 4 years of analysis, given that they have different requirements. I can't do that on the spot, Michelle, because I think that's a different question. They have capacity markets, they have different arrangements, and we do, their RA structure is not like California's RA structure. So I think making that one-to-one analogy is going to be difficult. But I think looking at our own market and looking and trying to understand what those requirements and connections are between what your market obligations are once you become an RA resource under the California program, I think is the most sound approach we can take. And making sure those costs are verified, of course. It should be consistent between those two regimes.
Thanks.
Okay. So, like I said, we'll go in order with our proposed modifications to our 831 compliance. First, we'll start with our potential modification for import bids, verification of those, and then moving on to our market constraint, which Danielle will touch on. So first is our import cost verification. And we've talked about that this morning, how the imports that we're talking about are different than the ones that we are calculating a reference level for and estimating their costs, and they have a whole different process in which we would be verifying their costs. The imports we're talking about in this discussion, but we talked about also, they don't have as easily verifiable costs as the other resources. They can, their bids can be based on different physical resources. Those can also vary from hour to hour, as well as the energy that they're getting from those resources can be from multiple resources in a single hour. And then they also have these opportunity costs, and calculating those opportunity costs can be subjective and highly complex. And our straw proposal, when we first came out with this at the beginning of the year, acknowledge the difficulty that would come with trying to estimate the cost for these particular resources. And so therefore we did not directly propose to verify their costs before the market. And so now we're trying to come up with another way that would do that, would screen these bids, but not actually be based on their verified costs. So what we're proposing to do is to calculate a maximum import bid price, and this is what we're using to cost verify these bids. They ultimately use as a screen. We would then determine, or we're proposing two different options on how we would then use this import bid price. The first option is we would use it as a cap, and so it would be the maximum of $1,000 or our ISO calculated maximum import bid price. If an import bid is submitted above $1,000 and the maximum import bid price, then we would reject that import bid. And the other option is to use the maximum import bid price as like the highest cost available. So if an import bid is above $1,000 and the ISO maximum import bid price, we would take the greater of that import price or the $1,000. So, and then under this option, we would provide for after-the-fact cost recovery of the original bid they submitted to ISO, and we have examples of what we mean by this later on.
So I just made this point yesterday. So if you reject a bid above $1,000, I wanted to make 2 points, one of which is if we have speculative supply, that's exactly what they want. They want their bid rejected so they don't have to do anything, so I'm concerned about that. The second thing is, if you reject their bid, I raised this, would you give them a rain penalty for essentially putting in an ineligible bid? And I think the answer I heard yesterday was yes, you would rain penalize those people.
Yeah, we would consider that. It wasn't part of this, what we put forth yet, but that's something we would think about.
We hadn't, that wasn't in our proposal, but that sounds like a consideration, and we'll likely modify our approach to mention that, or to include that.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll go through now how we would calculate this maximum import bid price that we're going to use in each one of these options. So bear with me as we go through these calculations. So we would be using this or calculating this similar to what we did for the hydro default energy bid, and we would be taking the maximum of the two components, the electric hub price and then the long-term opportunity cost component, and then conclude with a 1.1 multiplier, and then that multiplier is to account for small differences that we see between the bilateral energy market and the CAISO market prices. This maximum import bid price would be calculated once a day for each hour and then used in the day-ahead and real-time market. The price used will be calculated separately for on- and off-peak hours. There was some discussion on the different bilateral things that you can purchase on ICE, and so we're of course open to the different bilateral packages that are for this particular. Well, we were just assuming on and off peak at this point for the 16-hour blocks. The import price would then also be calculated separately for the northern and southwestern region, respectively. So we'd have two different prices used in the north and as well in the south. Michelle.
Sorry, this is Michelle. We went over this yesterday. However, if you're looking forward at opportunity cost and you think you can pull the prices from hub to hub because you assume that they have transmission capacity, why would you ever have any difference between the northern and the southern interties?
That component, you're right, it would be because it's the max of all the hubs, and that is something we're also considering as well.
So you could just take out calculated separately because it doesn't matter the way you're doing it, right?
Pardon?
The northern and southwestern part is referring to this electric hub price, not to the long-term opportunity cost. But like we talked about yesterday, we're likely to drop this long-term opportunity cost from the formula anyway, because Brittany will get into it, that it's based on monthly futures, which it's pretty unlikely that monthly futures are going to be greater than $1,000. You know, if prices ever do, it's pretty unlikely that day-ahead prices are going to be greater than $1,000. And so to the extent we do get prices greater than $1,000, it would probably be a fairly short-lived thing for hours or days, and those prices would always be greater than these long-term, the monthly futures, so there's probably no point in having that part in the formula.
Right, but that would get rid of...
We were basing this on the hydro deb.
Yeah, but that would get rid of your time being able to move like September to April, but that doesn't get rid of the ability to move. So you're getting rid of costs entirely. So you're saying if you're at the southwestern hub, you can't use the northwestern tie price. Is that right?
Yeah, we would calculate a maximum import bid price for the southwestern ties, and we would calculate a maximum import bid price for the northern interties. And if you were bidding at the northern interties, you'd be subject to the northern maximum bid price. If you were bidding at the southwestern ties, you'd be subject to the southwestern.
I sense your frustration, but this is not the default energy bid for hydro resources, so I'm just trying to clarify. So thank you.
MSC, do you guys have any questions? I know you were talking sidebar.
Yeah. Let's see. Michelle raised the issue of perhaps an RA resource putting in a bid. Turns out it's not allowed, and they wouldn't, and then they get subject to REM penalty. Do you anticipate that this maximum price is something that bidders would know before they submit their offers to the market?
We thought about that. We didn't initially propose anything yet. I was like right before the paper came out, we were debating that. So we're open to discuss that. We haven't landed one way or the other. So
I know that some commenters would really like a safe harbor just for mitigating risk, and if they don't know what cap they're facing, they don't want to. They wouldn't want to offer something that has a chance of being turned down. That was okay.
Right.
But on the other hand, to calculate this the morning, the day before, I can see how that would be more challenging. You'd rather have more recent gas price information, for example.
Right, and we do account for that in the electric hub price for gas updates. We'll get into that in a second. But then also both options in which we would use this maximum import bid price, it is essentially a safe harbor. It's just whether or not we tell them what the price is before they're submitting it to
Right. It's not a safe harbor if you're not sure what direction to point the boat in.
Right.
You might hit the rocky shore.
Yeah. Okay.
Especially for Michelle's concern, it seems to me we ought to tell the RA import suppliers ought to know what the maximum is so they can offer below it.
Good point. Is there any questions on the phone, Jamie? Okay. So
quick question. I'm sorry to interrupt. Before you move, can you explain the 1.1 again? I missed.
Sure. It's to account for those small differences in prices between the bilateral energy market and the CAISO. So they're typically converge, but there are some instances in which there's a little difference. So it's just a small multiplier to account for that.
Okay. And would there be like a review on that number periodically, or is that?
We hadn't planned on that, but I mean, if you were open to suggestions.
Okay. Thank you.
Why would you think that it would need to be?
No, I'm just questioning.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have a position either way.
I don't think the 1.1 is that's what we use in our default energy bids to
today
account for price differences. I don't envision us periodically reviewing the 1.1. I think it would just be set at the 1.1.
Okay, thanks. And this is Andrew with SMUD, by the way. Sorry.
Thank you. So I have a comment on 1.1. So one is ample precedent for that and our other mitigation procedures to account for uncertainty in gas prices. In this case, there may be a lot more uncertainty because of this shaping that we're going to be talking about soon, and that might be reason for something greater than 1.1, but we'll get to that.
Okay.
Yep.
There also could be transmission costs depending on where the hub.
Right.
There could be transmission costs from where the hub is to the CAISO.
Good point. Okay. So this maximum import bid price represents an import's highest potential opportunity cost. We calculate this because the ISO market doesn't have the information of where these imports are coming from. We talked about that. We touched on that this morning. And then the component of the electric hub price represents the opportunity cost for bilateral sales in an hour, and that's based on these published day-ahead bilateral electrical price indices. And then this component, and we'll talk about it, is shaped hourly based on load. And then it'll also be adjusted for gas prices, that some of the differences that can occur from day to day. The long-term opportunity cost component represents the long-term opportunity cost for use-limited resources, and those are based on month-ahead, future prices for those electric price indices.
Brittany, Michelle Keto, so I just got a little confused. So are we using electric hub prices, or are we using the CT and gas prices? Are we using the max of those two? I got confused about that.
Okay, yeah, so, and we'll talk about that here in a second, but we are using the electric price, the electric hub component, but then it's also taking into account gas price indices, and then we'll calculate based on an average heat rate of a generator for gas. We're going to calculate a new electric price so that it's accounting for the volatility that won't necessarily be caught in the bilateral price because it's a day-ahead price. So, the differences in gas prices can change from day to day. So today we update gas prices in the morning if things have changed because they're published the night before. So we want to make sure that prices are reflective
Yeah, so let's say we use electric hub. Are you saying like the daily electric hub price, like the tomorrow's electric hub price? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, Brittany. It's Mark Smith with Calpine. So in calculating this equivalence price, you're going to look at the electric hub. Let's just say an electric hub is clearing at $1,200. You're going to say that's your opportunity cost. You can bid up to that. But if I was to bid that and then import it into the ISO, which I think is your motivation, I'd be exposed also to GHG charges as well, in addition to the transmission costs that Dr. Harvey suggested.
Mm-hmm.
So shouldn't there be further increments to that price to make it equivalent to a California-like price?
I mean, well, we also don't know, too, what the source of this resource is, so I don't know how we could account for that.
I think people pointed out a couple things we need to consider. There's the cost of transmission and then GHG costs. Potentially, we could modify our approach to include adders for those.
Yeah. Are there any other questions?
There's an established formula now for system, the GHG requirement for system imports, right? So I think it should be fairly straightforward to come up with a number that's representative for a generic import from a given region.
Yeah.
Is there anything on the phone, Shammy? Okay. So then now we're going to walk through how we're going to calculate each component in this maximum import bid price. So we're starting first with the electric hub price. So this estimates the current prevailing hourly bilateral electric price by converting that daily published index price into hourly values. So just recalling those bilateral electricity prices, again, one price for a certain amount of hours, and so it's the average price, where the CAISO market creates different prices for every hour. So we're just trying to convert that into a price similar to load and what it's seeing, so it's fluctuating, and there's an example of that here. So what we would do is we would take the hourly load forecast minus the load forecast average, divide that by the load forecast average, and then times it by a price. And the price here is where we're going to be taking, and that shouldn't say average, it should say the highest gas price, and then the electric hub price.
And our way we've labeled these variables, I can see that might have caused some confusion. This really isn't the average gas price. This is an electric price based on gas price.
Yeah. Right, yeah.
You know, if you think about this, if you use the gas price, it's not clear to me you need to do all this adjusting for the hourly prices. I mean, the issue with the electric price is it's going to have hours in which gas is not on the margin, and it's going to have hours where gas is on the margin. But if we just use the gas price, I don't think you need to go through all this other stuff. You just have to use the gas price to come up with what's the, you know, gas price plus transmission plus GHG, and that's it.
Because are you saying that gas would be the highest cost out there?
Yes, the gas price would be the cost for the hour. I mean, when you're taking a flat electric price, you need to do the scaling because that electric price is the average over 16 hours, and 10 of those might be hours where solar and wind's on the margin, or hydro, and you're not burning high-cost gas.
Right.
There might only be the evening peak hours, so you might have 6 hours where in real life the price is $1,200, and 10 hours in which the price is $200 or $100. So, but that isn't true for gas because the gas price will be that $1,200.
But can't there be hours where there's even higher cost use limited hydro on the margin that's more expensive?
Yeah, so there would be maybe a subset of the block in the electric hub where the price would be set by scarcity, and it would be above the calculated gas price. And there would be other hours where it'd go the other way. And I guess this maximum is an hour-by-hour treatment, right? So, yeah, so sometimes that's why it's critical to think about how the hub price is getting shaped into hour-by-hour, but...
Well, no, this maximum is not an hour-by-hour treatment, because those are, that gas price and the electric hub price.
So the electric hub price is the block, it's not the adjusted block.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so, yeah, then there could still be a residual issue if the average gas price is higher for the low parts of that block, but then there could be a spike in that block that's drawn the average up. That could still lead to a mismatch there. But yeah, I think the point is whenever there's if the electric hub price is over $1,000, there's going to be a lot of scarcity involved, and then the gas price shouldn't be affecting it because gas wouldn't be on the margin. Maybe some expectation of future costs might be.
Why would it be over I mean, we're talking about high prices due to fuel costs, which presumably means that it's gas. I mean, I have a hard time, if we're just talking about, are we talking about scarcity in the West?
Yeah, that would be.
But I mean, then the fuel cost, all this justification is off the table because it's what utilities can shed their load to help out California or risk it.
That's what I imagine.
And that's all of this is completely or pretty irrelevant for that.
Right. Well, I mean, for this average gas price to get above $1,000, we're talking about some really high gas prices, right? So I don't know how often we're expecting that to be really relevant.
But I think that's what this whole Order 831 is about gas prices. It's not about one ISO shedding load at the expense of another. It's
The 831 is supposed to be fuel neutral, by the way. I just want to make sure that's clear. It's not really just about, I mean, it is gas motivated, but it's supposed to be fuel neutral. Just saying.
I mean, practically, the kind of situation we're thinking, at least I would be concerned about, is that we do have West-wide scarcity, and we don't want to be capping our market lower than what the sort of scarcity value outside would be, if at least.
But that's a very different animal, Jim. So then it's not based on cost; it's based on how much are we to pay to get somebody to risk shedding a load.
Absolutely, but I guess I've been the electric hub price, in theory, should be reflecting that. Now, the gas index won't, but the hub price, that's why the hub price is critical.
That's an average over a number of hours. So I have just a comment about...
Or it's a flat block, there's no problem.
But that wouldn't, sorry, this is...
Sorry. So this formula may really understate the implicit price in peak hours because it's assuming basically a price elasticity, a supply of 1. But if we're getting close to 1,000, as Jim has pointed out in a lot of his papers, we're getting near the hockey stick, and the elasticity, price elasticity is going to be a lot less than 1. And so the price impact to a small change in load might be much greater than what we have here. And so I guess there was a proposal from PowerX to base it on some actual experience, and so that's a testable hypothesis, the sort of thing that Jim has actually done in the past. So it'd be interesting to take a look at that type of information. I don't know any better way to try to get price differentiation by hour than something like this. It's just that I think we'll need to take a look at what sort of elasticity might be a little bit more realistic.
This thought before you go, because I agree. I don't think the load weighting is going to give you the right shape, because just what I was talking about before, you might have high gross load during hours in which solar is on the margin and you don't have to burn gas, and it's just completely off to me.
Yeah,
so that's why I think PowerX's point is, of looking at what is the typical shape of prices, and that's something we can easily study. I mean, and you could compare it. We don't have to wait to implement this. That'd be pretty straightforward, and I think I'd restrict it to high price days. Days where the price, you had hourly prices of $300 or $500, because I bet the shape is going to be a lot different on those days than other days, and you'll probably see it's very skewed.
So thank you for waiting, Michelle.
Yeah, so this is Michelle. So I just want to make the point that we're not capping the SMEC price, we're just capping the import bid. So, right? So we're just saying imports, I don't want them to be setting the marginal price because they haven't cost verified. But that doesn't mean internal bids, if they have high gas price, can't be setting the margin. And in fact, it's more likely that they would be because we have that extra intrastate gas charge between the border and Southern California gas, which is very constrained. So if we see constraints of gas coming to the border. We're going to see even greater constraints coming into Southern California. So I don't see this issue because we're not saying that they can't get the system marginal energy cost. We're just saying they can't bid above that, right?
But we're working through a circumstance where it's not a gas issue, it's a west-wide scarcity issue.
Which would be also in California, right?
Yeah, but these issues would apply to California units as well in those cases.
And you don't think people would be bidding? I mean, internal resources would be bidding. You think internal resources always bid their cost?
Well, the issue would be even if they were, I think, and we'll talk about like how the power balance constraint value would be set based upon this limit.
Well, let me just say,
is what the right
yeah, but you guys should look. I mean, people aren't bidding their costs. I mean, you know, all the time.
Well, this is Anna. Above 1,000, though, they would be. Above 1,000, we would cost verify the internal resources, and that's fuel neutral, regardless what kind of fuel it is. So above 1,000, it would be cost verified at least.
Well, sort of, right? Because they can do their expected gas price, and they can say the expected gas price is something. So, you know, not exactly cost verify.
Well, we think it's a pretty robust program.
No, that's not correct.
Yeah, we don't agree with that, but
we're not. When we say you can cost verify based on expected or actual costs, a generator can't say, well, I think gas is going to go to $50 this afternoon, so that's my expected cost. But by expected, we're still requiring that to be based by some kind of quote. We just mean that they don't have to have actually purchased it at that time, and they may later buy gas and face a different price. But we're not saying expected means you can just speculate and put in any price you want.
Right, but let's just go back to what happened last summer with the gas prices. It was not that we actually had an OFO, and it was not as if they were charged the OFO price. They just anticipated the OFO, which got reflected in the prices, which they then may or may not have paid. I'm just saying that it can be. Yes? Brian?
Thanks, Brittany. Michelle, if you're talking about July 24th, there was a Stage 4 OFO in place on that day.
Right, and some people might have already bought gas, right? And it was only on for one day, but how many days were the gas prices high?
Okay, the next price, you're arguing that the next day prices were high because they were anticipating an OFO. I won't disagree, but I thought I misheard, maybe I misheard you. I heard you that there was no OFO during that time. There was.
There was an OFO on one day when potentially some marginal people got the penalty. That doesn't mean everyone got the penalty, and the people that were bidding the penalty in didn't necessarily experience the penalty that day or subsequent days when they expected the penalty.
But, okay, so just to be clear, the scenario I was, and I think we were all talking through, which I think is, I don't know, maybe we'll see $50 gas, but I would think of it as the more relevant scenario would be one in which we have 3-4 hours of scarcity west-wide. And then the question becomes, what's the right scarcity price, and how does that get averaged into a 16-hour hub price, and how do we decompose that into sort of an appropriate true opportunity cost?
I guess I'm thinking that's sort of hopeless, and I've been thinking about gas prices. I've been thinking about, and to go to Michelle's point, I'm thinking about like what happened a winter or so ago where it was really tight up, the gas was tighter up in the Pacific Northwest than here, and if we were to get the imports, they were going to have to pay that price. And I guess if the price was lower down here, we should be burning ours, but that was what the imports were coming in at. Now, I guess, would the gas market clear? We'd keep buying gas down here until we drove the price to the same level as Pacific Northwest?
For this gas price component, we were, it says average here. I thought we were contemplating the highest cost gas.
Yeah, I mentioned that
West.
earlier, that it should say the highest.
Yeah.
Right, so it's not, my thought is it's not necessarily a California gas price, although you could say, I guess, in equilibrium that all the California gas price should get pulled up if we're importing power from the Pacific Northwest, but that's a sort of complicated question about how the indexes get equilibrated. The other aspect of this, which I'll throw out while we're on this, if we're to use the CT, are we going to include the fuel start costs for the CT, or are we just going to use the average heat rate once it's started? Because if we're talking about starting a unit for 1 or 2 hours, I mean, if it's a combined cycle, you're going to have even larger startup costs and maybe have to run it for a couple hours. But if they're just starting a CT to sell power into California for 1 hour, are we going to include the startup costs or just the incremental cost for the hour once you've got it going?
Yeah, we hadn't contemplated that, but maybe that's another argument for a bigger multiplier. You know, we could calculate some kind of ratio of startup costs to energy costs and you know.
But if we have west-wide scarcity, you don't think that these things are going to be running? Shouldn't every combined cycle be running if we have scarcity?
But then the marginal cost or the opportunity cost then is a scarcity price, has nothing to do with gas prices. It's going to be above that.
Right, or GHG. Or
one where it's gas scarcity and gas is really expensive, but we've got a bunch of units. And in that case, we're probably not running the worst CT in the world because we're short of gas, not CTs. And in the other situation Jim's talked about, we're short of capacity, and then the gas price probably isn't relevant because it's what the utility risking shedding load if they sell power to California.
Yeah, we're playing musical chairs, and it's going to be the band scarcity price that should be setting. Anybody on?
And just a clarification, I noticed on this slide, this should say use highest priced gas price region is what our intent was, not the. So we would, so for example, when gas prices spiked in Puget last year, whatever it was, we would use that gas price because what we're trying to do is calculate the highest potential cost in the West that could be the source of an import.
But you guys just told me we were going to have a Southwest and a Northwest hub. So now are you saying we're not having a Southwest and a Northwest hub?
Not saying that.
We're using. Go back to the formula. The formula is a max, right? So the max, that electric hub price, that is a price for north and south. The gas price is a different component. The gas price, we would use the highest gas price in the West.
Can you talk about the logic of why you would use two different gas prices? Or not use two different gas prices, but use two different electric prices?
We're trying to calculate the max of the opportunity costs and the actual physical costs. So the bilateral electrical price at the hub is the bilateral opportunity cost, but then the gas component is trying to put a floor on that cost to ensure that the price we're calculating is at least as high as the highest cost of production.
Yeah, but just to keep how hard this is going to be, I mean, it could be that the price is so high up in Puget that they're not using it for electricity, and although the gas-fired power is being generated in other places, and so that this price could actually be, if you took the highest gas price anywhere, that might be an area where all the gas is being used for heating, and you've completely backed out, and everybody that's on gas is actually switched to oil or not burning. So this is why this gets really tricky. But on the other hand, that's why setting sort of a default price might be better than trying to figure out what it is for every resource.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess when I think about, I thought about the gas price as sort of attempting to try to update the opportunity cost to the extent it might be a little dated. But sort of back to the earlier discussion, either the hub price is going to reflect a really high gas price, and if the gas price spikes, then we need to update that, or it's reflecting scarcity, in which case the gas price wouldn't matter, and it probably wouldn't enter into this calculation. But if you're concerned about the physical cost of a resource, and gas is actually congested across the West, and so there is a very high price in Puget but a low price in Arizona, it seems like the unit in Arizona actually has a lower physical cost then. And I'm not sure why we would use Puget gas costs for that unit if the spirit of this is to figure out what its physical costs are.
Well, our thought was that we don't know the source of where an import is, but maybe, you know, maybe on the Southwest ties, it's just impractical to ever have the source be up in the Northwest, for example, and then, you know, so maybe a potential modification would be to limit the gas prices used for each tie or each, you know, tie region.
Is there any questions on the phone? We just talked about this. Do you want me to, I mean, I think we can move ahead.
Just move on.
Yeah.
Just ask a quick question. The timing of this, calculated each morning for use, is this obviously for the day ahead, this would be the morning, the day before. How about for real-time prices, you know, the real-time markets this afternoon, would gas prices from the morning, this morning been used for this afternoon, or yesterday morning?
This morning. So we proposed in CCW those gas updates. We would do the day ahead in the real time.
As soon as you can. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Okay. So then moving on to the other component of the maximum import bid price is this long-term opportunity cost. This is going to be calculated based on monthly forward electric prices of the major bilateral electric trading hubs in the West. And then we're also assuming that it's for an import that's use limited and has limitations for 12 months. We thought this was a reasonable estimation of the longest period applicable both for gas and use limited resource limitations. So there was talk yesterday if we were changing the way that we use this electric hub price, PowerX had thought about or suggested maybe using the SMEC prices and comparing that. And then they said if we did something like that, there may not even need to be this long-term opportunity cost component in this. And we, as Brad mentioned earlier, we're kind of leaning towards that as well.
I'm certainly sympathetic to that.
Yeah.
This is, you know, there's no point. If we've got 12-month prices that are $1,000, but
we're in trouble.
What would they have been in 2000?
50.
They're 250, so.
Yeah. Seems pretty obvious now. We were just
we were just, you know, it was similar to the hydro stuff, so figured sure that. So yeah. Okay, so then after this, once we've calculated this maximum import bid price, then it's deciding on what option we want to go with in using it. So this first option is using it at as a cap. So it assumes ISO, again, doesn't have the ability to verify those import costs. Even after the fact, this option would not require suppliers to submit their import bids based on actual or expected costs, and it effectively creates the safe harbor we were talking about earlier of import bids that the CAISO would just automatically accept. So an example of this, for, say, an import supplier submits a bid of $1,200 and our calculated import bid energy price is $1,100, then the CAISO would reject the original import bid of $1,200 because that is above the maximum import energy price as well as the $1,000. So a pro of this is it ensures that the import suppliers in the ISO market will not have their bid accepted at a price that's below what they originally submitted. The alternatively, the con of that is then we, the CAISO, lose the access to that potential supply that may be needed in whatever conditions for that.
Right. So this is, you know, the standard framing we have. Anytime we talk about market power mitigation at the MSC, we wind up talking about false positives and their costs and false negatives and their costs and the probabilities of each. So in this case, let's see, the false positive would be having a tight threshold for rejecting, and some supply goes away because in reality the opportunity costs out there are higher. Are we versus having something that's too loose, and there might be some market power abuse. And so I'm concerned about the con because the likelihood of the markets, the rest of the West, being uncompetitive and imposing large market power costs on us versus chasing away supply because we're we're putting a very low threshold that, this is really a WAG, you know what that stands for, in terms of what this threshold should be. The con here looms large for me anyway. That's just my opinion.
Callie. Oh, sorry, this is Callie Wells with WPTF. And just one other thought I had kind of on the same train of thought there is, now on top of that con, if they were to then reject that bid and apply RAIM, now they're also assessed an additional penalty just because they got the cost wrong.
Another discouragement.
Yeah, so I have the opposite issue. I mean, we know that we have bids that are trying not to get selected, and so you just purposely, you purposely bid, so because it's the whole RA problem. So you have these resources, 500, 1,000, potentially growing to 3,000. Who knows? It's zero cost RA. Trying not to get selected. So you have the opposite problem as well.
So, these pros and cons, it just occurred to me, I think we were kind of thinking of these pros and cons in relation to the two alternatives, relative to each other's. But I think what Ben's pointing out, and I think Michelle's pointing out, is maybe there's a con to doing this import bid verification at all, because we will lose access to potentially needed supply, and then we are opening up, we are even, quote unquote, maybe further enabling the paper RA.
Can I please address that? Because I actually think this is really important. So let's just recall that FERC said you can raise the bid cap from 1,000 to 2,000, but they wanted to only do it if it was cost justified. So for internal resources, they must cost justify before they go into the run. So now we have external resources that do not have this. So why would they not just So then we have resources that are external, and they're not going to be cost justified. What is the justification for treating these differently? If we think it's so important that they be cost-based bids before they do the market run, why do we allow the importers to just get off the hook? That's my first point. And secondly, we also know that we have those speculative supplies, which why do we call it speculative supply? They say they're providing capacity, which they are not. They're bidding at $1,000 in April. Why do we think that it's okay for them to sit not at $1,000 but to sit at $2,000? I'm sort of dumbfounded that we're not concerned about this. We know that they're gaming, right? I mean, this is the kind of stuff that happened in the energy crisis. People start pushing little bit. What can I get away with here? And we're now saying, go ahead, get away with it.
I think we are concerned about it. There's an ongoing sort of, I think, wrestling with exactly which channel to try to primarily address it through. And so I guess one of the concerns is we have this kind of, let's call it a gap in the RA import sort of specifications and how far we go adjusting other market rules to try to accommodate that.
I would like to address that as well. So we've made our valiant effort to do this, and the CAISO has opposed us and has done an application for rehearing. We were trying to make it physical. So I'm frustrated that we have tried our best to try to address this, and everyone, including the generators, including CAISO, and including the ESPs, are trying to undercut us. And they may very well win, which means we will still have speculative supply.
Well, I think we will talk about this afternoon. So it's probably a good time to revisit that. I think there are other ways to deal with it than what your proposal was. But anyway, well, we will this afternoon then. But I actually, did you want to jump in on that? Because I wanted to back up a second. I thought we were going to talk about the load shaping, and we kind of didn't.
Yeah.
Is that crap not in here?
No, it is. Go back. I skipped over it.
Yeah.
That's what happened.
I just feel it has to, that has to go that can't go unrebutted because I think it's really important. You're right. If we could deal with the speculative supply, I would be less concerned about it, but no one's helping me address the speculative supply.
To follow up on that, the question is, do we want to put in a price like this for import RA who has an obligation to supply power to take in our RA money and say you have to offer at or below this price for import RA, but for people that have no obligation to help California, and we hope they do, If you're not import RA, if you're another utility that's willing to sell power in, we'd say, well, we're not going to have a cap. But then those are two very different people, and I think the people that have an obligation to sell power to California are very different from the people who have no obligation.
Yeah, I tend to agree, but I'd also say that people could be resource specific, they could bid in at whatever, and they can cost justify. They choose not to do so, okay? So they could be like an internal resource, and we could say they're really great, we can cost justify them, but they choose not to go that path. They choose to go this other path. We tried to make it physical, like energy, and everyone thinks that's just the worst thing in the world. What they want to be is they want to be resource specific, or actually they want to come in like non-specific resource, but they want to say they're resource specific so they can bid at $1,000. And no one's really helping me try to address that question. So.
Jim, did you want to go over that? We rushed through it just because we jumped ahead to the gas and then we didn't come back to it.
Right. I guess I just wanted to highlight what maybe everybody already just sort of absorbed those points, but I think what Scott was saying, you know, that if we're trying to think about how load shapes translate to price shapes, there's probably not a linear relationship there, especially if scarcity is driving up that average. And so maybe instead of a load profile, we want to at least see historically how price profiles compare to the averages during really high price hub prices, for example.
So wouldn't we address all this by just having a requirement that all RA imports be resource specific?
I keep trying to defer this to the afternoon, Brad. It seems like there are lots of ways. You could just say RA imports have to bid $1,000 or less, or $500. But it would be something that would apply only to RA imports.
Everyone is now arguing, you should be on our service list, they are now arguing, saying that they talked to FERC attorneys, that this is federal preemption and we can't tell RA how to bid. So just so you know, but anyway, just frustrating. With regard to the shape, I absolutely agree. The net load hours are always higher. So the higher hours are 16 to 21 and we should send that price signal. I absolutely agree. Thanks.
Conversely, the cap would be lower than the other hours, maybe much lower.
Okay. I'll talk about our second option, too, for using this import bid price. We would do this by reducing import bids that were both above $1,000 and the maximum bid price to the greater of that import price or the $1,000. So the original bid price would be eligible for after the fact uplift payment if the ISO could later determine that their costs were actually were able to be verified and those actual costs. It's kind of similar to the option that we did in CCW as far as like reference level adjustments and the thresholds of that. This option creates also a safe harbor for import bids to be accepted by ISO. It does also not require the bid to be on actual costs, but it does put the actual cost up again in that we've discussed how difficult that is. If they would like to receive after the fact cost recovery, they need to provide the ISO and demonstrate that their bid was based on actual costs. So an example of this option is an import bid is submitted at $1,500. The ISO's calculated import price is $1,300. In this instance, the ISO would reduce the import bid from $1,500 to $1,300 and use the $1,300 in the market, and the remaining $200 not passed through the market would be eligible for after the fact cost recovery. The other opposite of that is the same bid is submitted at $1,500, but our maximum energy price is $950. We're taking the greater of $1,000 or this bid price, so they would actually, their import bid price would be reduced to $1,000, and then the $500 remaining from their original bid would be eligible for after the fact cost recovery.
One suggestion I have is if you do this, I'd put the unmitigated price as offered in the scheduling run and only put the cap in the pricing run. And that way, if you had one offer at $1,500 and another at $1,400, another at $1,300, in the scheduling run, you'd choose the cheapest resource Because otherwise you could end up choosing the resource that's actually a $1,500 offer when someone else had a cost-justified $1,300 offer because they have different heat rates or different startup costs. And I think what you're concerned about is the price being set in the pricing run, but that's different from putting in the actual offers in the scheduling run, so that you'll always choose, no regrets, that you'll choose the offer that is cheapest if it turns out they're telling the truth.
Okay. Yeah, you can imagine to keep the original offers, if you truly think they're way too high in there, that could distort the balance between imports and internal resources. But still, there needs to be some tiebreaker. So it could be if one resource is $200 above this threshold, another one is $100, you could make their bids, put them in at the threshold plus epsilon for the first one, and the threshold plus 2 epsilon for the second one, as a tiebreaker.
So, Ben, this is Don from the ISO. So, and under the available balancing capacity design, we do that today for that. So that's something where we basically have the energy offers in the scheduling run so that but they're above $1,000 because we don't want to call on them until after. We don't want to use them for not meeting that individual balancing authority area's needs. So that's something we could look at to do exactly that.
Remember Peter's comment and we checked on the phone?
No questions.
Yeah, no one has raised their hand, so if you are out there on the phone and do want to ask a question, we are monitoring this. But, yeah.
Okay, and then just quickly, the pros and cons of this option. The import suppliers have the potential to recover any amount that was limited from their original bid amount after the fact, so long as they can demonstrate to the ISO that those were their actual costs. So this alternative to option 1, this would increase the amount, may increase the amount of imports that are offered to the ISO. And the con of this is we've already talked about how difficult it is for the ISO to verify these costs even after the fact. And so that would continue to be an issue with this option. And then as we mentioned earlier, the supplier's costs are often driven by their opportunity costs, which are complex and subjective. So those are just the options we're weighing.
Now remind me of this cost justification process sort of goes to, it's kind of in the hands of the supplier at that point. They need to file for this and then go through the process of providing the evidence and so forth?
Correct. Essentially, yeah. So and then again, they have to be based on actual costs.
Periodically, we've heard suppliers kind of express the sentiment that this was a very burdensome process.
Well, and also from our perspective, we don't know what type of documentation as well that we're going to need for them to provide, assuming all these different imports have different cost verification or different ways that they calculate.
And does the ISO or DMM play a role in this? Like, is it sort of like a debate, or is it just sort of they present their information to FERC and FERC decides?
Well, so this would actually be for the ISO first. They always have the potential to seek cost recovery from FERC, but this particular one in which we're talking about is where in CCW we introduced a step in which we would do, the ISO would look at this and have a conversation with the supplier and ask for information, go back and forth.
Yeah, the burdensome process was, people were referring to the requirement to file at FERC generally, not the ISO's after the fact cost verification. They were arguing for the ISO to provide for make-whole payments and a process for the ISO to verify costs after the facts rather than having to file with FERC.
But so let's go back to this is Michelle. Let's go back to the gas versus scarcity issue, right? So if it's a gas, you should be able to verify costs, or if it's a contract. I guess my concern is always gaming. So, you bought from an affiliate at a price, and then you show that. So I feel like, this is reasonable. We're talking about high prices. If you can justify it, you get paid. If you can't, you get and I point out here, you don't get, I guess you're saying, don't they still get paid the system marginal energy price? They don't, we're just limiting their bids again. So what we're saying is, oh, they're going to only be in trouble if they're marginal. But what is the chance that they're going to be marginal? And that's my concern. Do we really want the import bids that are not really cost justified in the same way as internal resources being the marginal unit?
Yeah, I was just sort of trying to get a sense of where this stands. But I guess on the marginal point, we are talking about bids that would be above the max offer price. Right. And so I believe they would earn that max offer price, but they would need to request anything above that.
Sorry, this is Michelle. They'd earn the max offer price or the system marginal energy price, assuming it included higher.
Right, but as we're going to talk about, okay, there's a question as to whether that system energy price is set at the max offer price or not.
Right.
There's a scenario in which they're just the same thing.
Right. And before we dive into that and move on to the next topic, are there any questions on the phone? All right, Danielle. Thanks.
Thanks, Brittany. So, as mentioned previously, we have a second topic for this morning related to market parameters. Let's get into some background. So the ISO market may relax constraints when it needs to reach a feasible solution. For instance, when supply doesn't equal demand, the power balance constraint is relaxed. Or when the market cannot bring transmission flows below limits, transmission constraints are relaxed, et cetera. And we're going to, in this presentation, when we talk about relaxation parameter prices, we're referring to them as penalty prices. And currently, the power balance constraint is set at the hard energy bid cap of $1,000, and all other penalty prices are scaled relative to that. So we have two high-level options to address this. This slide and then the next slide will go into the high level, and then subsequent slides will go into more detail. So the first option involves scaling the penalty prices relative to the power balance constraint relaxation penalty price set at the $2,000 per megawatt hour hard energy bid cap. This is the same methodology as used today under the $1,000 per megawatt hour bid cap, and this was proposed to FERC in our compliance filing. The second option involves scaling the penalty prices relative to a $2,000 power balance constraint relaxation penalty price only when there are bids in the market that have been cost verified and greater than $1,000. There are two variations if this occurs on this option. The first variation is option 2A, which sets energy prices in the pricing run based on the use of the price discovery mechanism when we need to relax the power balance constraint. The second variation is option 2B, which sets prices in the penalty run, in the pricing run, based on the $2,000 power balance constraint penalty price. All right, so option one in some more detail. The power balance constraint penalty price is set at the hard energy bid cap, which is consistent with the existing rules. And this, in this option, the power balance constraint relaxation penalty price would be $2,000, and all other penalty prices would be scaled proportionally to $2,000. And keep in mind, the scaling would need to be studied and fine-tuned. But this aligns the administratively determined scarcity price with the maximum allowable bid price of $2,000. And this would send a stronger scarcity price signal, which would have a few different advantages. It would first compensate flexible resources that could respond to dispatch instructions to meet operational needs. It would also give import suppliers incentive to bid actual costs because they would receive higher relaxation penalty price of $2,000, and I did want to bring up that in the recent MSC opinion regarding system market power, the MSC noted that the higher scarcity price signal would help ensure that importers have actual generation capacity to back day-ahead import bids. Additionally, a stronger scarcity price signal would provide incentives to deliver supply in real time. However, it may be a higher price than necessary to incent additional supply.
Michelle Quito, CPUC. I just have a comment about the MSC opinion. That only works if you keep if you cap the import bids. So if you don't cap the import bids, they bid at a 2,000. We're just exactly where we are before. It provides no additional incentive.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
All right, option 2. So again, this option uses 2 sets of penalty prices in both the scheduling run and the pricing run. The first set is used if there are no cost-verified bids greater than $1,000. In this case, all penalty prices would be scaled relative to the $1,000 power balance constraint relaxation penalty price. The second set of penalty prices would be used if there is a cost-verified bid greater than $1,000. In this case, penalty prices would be scaled relative to $2,000. As mentioned previously,
Sorry,
that's okay.
Danielle. So number 2, these bids, these are just supply bids. These are not demand bids. So if you have demand bidding in the market and willing to go away for $2,000, that wouldn't result in 2 being satisfied.
Yeah, this is just for.
Yeah, okay, so I'll just make the general point here that if let's say all our supply bids are below $1,000, but we run out of them and we're in a scarcity situation, then we wind up with the penalty prices being based on 1,000 rather than 2,000. That doesn't make sense to me if we're in a scarcity situation. But I think we should be using the higher ones. You understand what I'm saying? So.
Can you explain that point again, Dan?
I'm not understanding.
So let me just restate that in case I got something wrong. And then, so if we're in a situation, run out of supply bids, but they happen to be less than $1,000. So we're just used up all the capacity. We're in a scarcity situation, let's say west-wide, then the market prices should be reflecting scarcity, should be up more towards 2,000 than closer to 1,000. In fact, if indeed load is being curtailed, it can be argued that it should be more like Texas-type levels.
So Ben is basically just stating an opinion that $1,000 is, he believes, low for a true scarcity value.
And this test wouldn't allow the second situation if it's only scarcity and supply bids are below than 1,000. Okay, so is that clear? So now Michelle.
Yeah, so I'm going to disagree with you. So I think $1,000 is high. Just recall, if you have $1,000 for 3-4 days, we could lose billions of dollars. So just bear in mind when you're talking about scarcity prices, you could be, and if you make that mistake and it's market power, not scarcity, you could be abetting a very large transfer of wealth away from ratepayers. So bear that in mind.
Right, and this is the balancing of the 2 risks. And then, but on the other side, if we want a turbine to be there 8 hours a year and only operating 8 hours a year, it's going to either need very high RA payments or it's going to need something like Texas-type levels. And everything else being equal, we would rather rely on a competitive spot market to provide those rents rather than RA.
Except that we've already in California developed a hybrid model where pretty much everything that exists has had a long-term contract, either a QF contract or another contract. There are some exceptions, but mostly the capital costs have been paid for. So I'd also like to make that point. Thanks.
The more they are paid for through the spot market, the better the incentives are. So where do we draw that line?
Okay. So if there are bids that are cost verified and greater than $1,000, then we have 2 variations to option 2 that would be applied. And the main difference between these is whether we use the price discovery mechanism in the pricing run or not. So option 2A sets market prices in the pricing run based on the last economic bid found using the price discovery mechanism. And for some background, the price discovery mechanism is used in the CAISO market for the first 12 months following an EIM entity's integration into the market. And it's designed to accommodate any sort of temporary pricing anomalies that could occur with the startup and transition of EIM operations. So under this proposal, we would extend the use of the price discovery mechanism to the CAISO balancing authority area. An advantage to this is that scarcity prices, the setting of scarcity prices at high cleared bid price instead of arbitrarily at $2,000. So this scarcity price wouldn't always be set at $2,000. It would be at the last economic bid, so presumably between $1,000 and $2,000, somewhere in between there.
So, I don't know, maybe this is coming up, but it seems like there's a third level here, which is the maximum import bid price, which is an index you're already calculating, and that if that actually does come in above $1,000, it seems reasonable to think of that as at a lower bound on what the scarcity price would be if that's being set by kind of West-wide electric hub prices. So somewhere between 2,000 and that maximum import bid price, it seems like it's mechanically very easy to just sort of move the, although I don't know how easy it is to adjust the parameter when actually running the model if it's a moving target.
Adjusting the parameters as a moving target is difficult, but in the event that you did have an import that had a cost-verified bid above the $1,000, it could be the last economic bid, and then that would set the cap. Or the maximum price that we would.
So what we're really talking about is a circumstance where the index takes us up above 1,000, but nobody actually bids it. And I think, going back to Ben's argument, so if we want to try to capture, to the degree this electric hub price is capturing scarcity, then we should use it. Now, I think there's real concerns that it's sort of averaging out a lot of stuff, and it may be, but I think it's probably a lower bound on it.
Yeah, that's.
So there are a few disadvantages we found that when there are cost-verified bids above $1,000, using the price discovery mechanism to set the energy prices could reduce incentives for imports to bid actual costs. And in this scenario, the suppliers would receive a relaxation penalty price of less than $2,000, and the less strong of a scarcity price signal could potentially detract additional supply here.
I'm sorry. Can you guys help me here? If you have scarcity, how are you attracting additional supply?
So, I mean, the idea would be, I think it's more the reverse. If we truncate offers too low, we're discouraging supply because they can sell someplace else at a higher price.
That's not what she said, though, so I'm just trying to understand. I mean, scarcity is you do not have enough resources to meet demand, right?
We don't,
what time period?
Scarcity, we mean tight conditions. I guess, technically, I guess scarcity is there's not enough supply to meet demand. I think we're using the term more loosely, and that we can attract additional supply in future hours if we're sending a strong price signal.
Okay, maybe I could ask you guys, where do you draw the line between scarcity and market power?
Well, conceptually, the scarcity is there's some constraint that's binding.
So there's literally not enough supply?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it could be a locational constraint, it could be a ramping constraint.
When you talk about system-wide issues, we're talking about literally supply can't meet demand. So maybe you could explain. I've had a really tough time with this.
Well, this example, the entity that has the supply is a regulated utility elsewhere in the West. They have some supply they could sell to you, but if they lose a unit after they made that sale, they'll have to activate their demand response in order to avoid shutting load. So they're willing to do that, but they're not willing to take that risk unless you give them a lot of money. because they don't want to have to go to their regulators and tell them that they shed load because they made a sale to the CAISO, unless they can tell them, well, we also made a good profit, which, could have reduced the cost to our ratepayers of having made that sale if we didn't have to do it. Because a scarcity situation really means you're asking all of these balancing areas in the West and load-serving entities to make a sale forward to the CAISO in the HASP, not knowing exactly what's going to happen to them in the next 2 hours. And that's the risk they've got, that, and they're going to be conservative about that, because no one's going to want to have to go back to their regulators and say, well, this happened because I made this sale to the CAISO, and they don't know exactly what's going to happen. So that's an area where it's gray, and, the high, you don't want to, maybe we don't want to pay $2,000 for that, but they're not going to necessarily say, well, I'm going to sell to the CAISO at the cost of fuel and bear this risk of having to talk to my regulators about what happened.
I guess I'm concerned that when scarcity is supposed to be, like there's literally not enough supply. I get that you go to penalty prices in those circumstances, but I'm just afraid scarcity here is covering for market power. And I mean, that's the bigger issue that we've dealt with. We didn't have scarcity, did we, in the energy crisis? What we had was market power. And so isn't that what we should be more concerned about?
Well, I mean, the relationship is that sometimes the exercise of market power can make the market look like it's in scarcity. So it's a question of why those resources have not been made available to the market. And sometimes it's really hard to know why they're not available, especially if we're talking about energy-limited resources. But yeah, I mean, conceptually the idea would be market power could cause a scarcity condition that's not a true scarcity condition if the resource were truly available at some lower cost. And
this brings me back to our point that we'll be talking about this afternoon, where we have literally resources saying, I am there, but they are not. So anyway, thanks.
That's different for your RA resources than for some other utilities resources.
Yep, I get that. Thanks.
All right, let's move on to the second variation, which sets market prices in the pricing run based on the $2,000 power balance constraint relaxation penalty price instead of using the price discovery mechanism. So this variation assumes that the market should send the higher price scarcity signal only when there are cost-verified bids in the market greater than $1,000. This option has the same advantages and disadvantages as option 1, but these are only relevant when there is a cost-verified bid greater than $1,000. So let's go through an example. Let's assume that the highest price cleared bid in the market is $1,200 per megawatt hour. If there is a power balance constraint in feasibility, then in option 2A, penalty prices would be scaled relative to the $2,000 power balance constraint penalty price. And in the pricing run, the use of the price discovery mechanism would find that the last economic bid is $1,200. Therefore, the energy prices would be set based on the $1,200 highest cleared bid. In option 2B, the penalty prices would be scaled relative to $2,000, and the pricing run would set energy prices based on $2,000 as well.
I'm sorry for the muttering off stage here. The first bullet, when the penalty price is scaled relative to 2,000 per megawatt, that's in the scheduling run. And then the second bullet is when you do the price discovery.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And they would be proportionally scaled, and I mentioned previously that there would need to be some fine-tuning to what that scaling would be, so it might not be precisely scaled, but we would need to study those.
Right. So the difference is just the pricing run between these two options.
Yes. Paul.
Did you say that you were going to change the penalty price to $2,000 in the scheduling run? I thought I heard you just say that. I think that's wrong.
That's what I asked. The scheduling run's penalty price is $6,500.
Yeah.
No. So let's be clear. There's a set of penalty parameters based upon a $2,000, and then you're going to have scheduling and pricing parameters, assuming that it's at the $2,000, and then you'll have a separate set that's $1,000 based.
So you're going to change the scheduling penalty parameter to 1,300 or 13,000? Okay, that was unclear.
Well, that's what I'm asking. Yeah.
Okay,
it's not clear to me you want to double. If you increase the cap from 1 to 2,000, it's not clear to me we want to double all these penalty prices. You ought to think really carefully about what you're getting at in terms of...
That's exactly right, and that's why we've said that there's two sets. We haven't determined what the actual scheduling and pricing parameters for all of the various transmission and scheduling relaxation parameters would be. We'd want to work through that and fine-tune it, and it's not as simple as adding $1,000 or doubling.
Oh, were you?
It was the same thing, yeah.
Thank God.
Okay, and I did want to talk a little bit about our proposal for treating virtual supply bids under option 2 and then under both variations 2A and 2B. So we're proposing that if there are cost-verified bids above $1,000, cost-verified physical supply bids greater than $1,000, then virtual supply bids greater than $1,000 would be allowed to bid above $1,000.
Okay, can you explain that? So if you had a physical supply bid at $1,200, are you saying the virtuals could bid up to $1,200, or they could bid up to $2,000?
They can bid up to $2,000.
So you could have a physical supply bid at $1,001, and the virtual supply could bid up to $2,000?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
And then
it seems like, I mean, we're probably not going to, I don't know if we're going to have this happen in the day-ahead market, but I mean, if you're worried about being cost justified, wouldn't you submit a virtual supply bid and then cover it with a real-time import bid? And why offer, if you can offer up to 2,000 as virtual supply, why would you offer physical imports? Why wouldn't you just offer a virtual supply bid in the day-ahead market, and then you wouldn't have to worry about any of the cost justification, and then you could cover it with, you know, an import bid in real time. It's not clear to me this having the virtual supply at being able to offer higher than the physical. I think you need to think through how this is going to work.
Well, arguing that you would cap the virtuals that you would accept to the highest cost verified bid over $1,000?
Yeah, if you have a verification, I think you'd want to. With a verification, I think you'd want to cap the virtual supply at that level, because, or there's something I'm missing, because I think it'd be really straightforward if I wanted to sell into the CAISO and I was worried about the cap or my costs were a little higher, I'd just submit a virtual supply bid.
But we're saying we're not going to accept virtual supply bids above 1,000 unless there are some cost justified bids.
But suppose there's a cost justified bid at 1,001. We have 1 megawatt at 1,001.
Then you're saying then that undermines our cost verification.
Well, that opens up the ability to sell through virtuals at 2,000 at that point.
The key is, I think,
right, which would then undermine our requirements.
Right, certainly. It undermines it, at least in the circumstance where the true index is somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000. It would basically bump it up to 2,000.
I assume also that all the export bids and price capped load bids and virtual demand bids would be at 2,000 whenever we were even possibly going to be in this world, because they wouldn't necessarily know what they should bid, so they'd always be able to put in 2,000. And would we scale them down then if it didn't trigger, or what would we do?
Your question was about virtual demand and demand bids?
Price capped load bids, export bids, and virtual demand bids are all buy bids.
Right.
And if there was a possibility that the clearing price was going to rise to 2,000, they might not want to leave it at 1,000, because then they'd all not clear. You know, the load serving entities might want to bid at the cap. So I assume, therefore, you'd let them always bid 2,000 and cut it down to your cap. If the validated bid was less than?
We weren't proposing to limit demand bids.
You what?
We were not proposing to limit demand bids to 1,000. They can bid up to the hard cap of 2,000.
Okay, so they could bid 2,000, and even when there's
Yeah, because they, you know, they don't have costs. You know,
I don't think it would,
so, you know,
We have a couple questions.
Yeah. So the second longer bullet there, is there a then missing there, or I'm not sure if I understand it. If there are no cost verified bids above 1,000, then virtual supply bids would not be accepted, right? I'm not sure what that can bid above 1,000 and what the congestion management means.
That's saying if we did allow virtual supply bids to be able to bid above 1,000 when there are no cost verified physical supply bids.
I'm sorry, Brad. Can you say that again?
That's saying if there was no cost verified physical supply bid above 1,000,
let's say the last
but virtual bids were allowed to bid above 1,000, then they could clear for congestion management.
Okay,
so
this is not a proposal. You're just saying what would happen.
Yes.
Okay.
I guess, so one way in which this could happen, I was curious about option 1 again. What is the thinking on virtual bids under option 1?
So in option 1, virtual supply bids would be able to bid up to $2,000 all the time.
Just blanket.
Mm-hmm.
Does that have to be the case? Is there a mechanical reason why virtuals have to be tied to the scarcity price?
Sorry, Jim, what was your question?
Under option 1, which is we're just going to set the scarcity parameter to 2,000, the power balance, would virtuals automatically have to be allowed at $2,000? Or is there a way to limit them? Like, is there a mechanical reason why the virtual bids have to be allowed to rise to this penalty value? Because what Scott just walked through is sort of makes it problematic to just blanket allow virtuals all the time at 2,000, and yet there are other things appealing about option 1. But if you were going to pursue option 1, I think you'd want to think about the virtual bidding aspect of it.
Our thought was just that the rules for virtuals and physical should be similar. So, you know, virtuals can provide the liquidity that, you know, maybe that does not.
But they wouldn't be similar, right? Because under option 1, you're setting the scarcity parameter to 2,000, but you're not just letting physical generation bid 2,000.
Correct.
So I think following your logic, the way to do it would be to set the scarcity value of 2,000, but still limit the virtuals to whatever the sort of maximum physical offer price would be.
Oh, okay, so you're saying an alternative to option 1 or a variation of option 1 is to set the penalty prices, or set the power balance constraint penalty price at 2,000 and scale everything relative to 2,000, but still limit virtuals to the highest verified physical bid or something.
I think following Scott's logic, you'd almost have to do that, or else you're sort of obviating the effectiveness of any cost verification, because you could just do it through virtuals.
Are there any questions on the phone? Okay. That's all we had for today, if there are no further questions. Yeah.
It's Mark Smith, Calpine. This is kind of a tangential question, but does changing the bid cap at all affect how the demand response programs are going to be bid into the market, like RDRR or PDR, which are at 95% of the cap?
I don't believe so, but we hadn't considered that.
Yeah, as I said, it's kind of a tangent. You might want to think about it. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Okay,
we still made it.
Good, and nobody's still on the phones. Okay. Okay, good. Peter, you must be happy with what's been presented. Okay, so we are shortly before lunchtime, so I think this is a good time to break, and then we will come back here at 1 p.m. to do resource adequacy enhancements. So thanks everybody online for listening, and operator, we can take a break now.